através da colaboração, né? E através do uso de informação consistente. Eu queria agora passar a palavra para a Paula Fabiani, que é a nossa, está agora como a coordenadora geral do nosso capítulo Brasil, né? E para ela nos introduzir nesse tema. Paula, boa tarde, muito obrigada.
Boa tarde, Gi, bom estar aqui com você, com o Rodrigo. É uma honra estar aqui no Green Nation Event. Acho que a gente tem várias discussões que estão acontecendo e a gente veio trazer essa ideia, né, de falar um pouquinho sobre a revolução que os empreendedores sociais estão fazendo no mundo. E essa revolução, ela só acontece se a gente realmente souber usar os dados, a informação e a tecnologia que a gente tem hoje a nosso dispor. E para isso, a gente convidou um dos cofundadores do movimento mundial, que é o Michael Green. Ele foi autor, né? Ele é autor do Philanthropic Capitalism, que é um livro que fala sobre essa nova geração de filantropos. Ele escreveu esse livro com o Matthew Bishop, que também participa do Catalyst Global. E ele vem, ao longo dos últimos anos, estudando o tema dos dados, de como usar os dados para atingimento dos objetivos do desenvolvimento sustentável, e criou um movimento para medir não mais o PIB, mas ter um indicador semelhante ao PIB, mas que mede o progresso das sociedades, olhando também para questões e indicadores humanos e sociais. E ele vai contar um pouquinho sobre isso e vai contar também como ele vê, qual a visão dele sobre o uso de dados para catalisar impacto social positivo e criar transformações na nossa sociedade local e global. E aí, com isso, né, a gente vai trazer o Michael Green para conversar, para falar um pouquinho para vocês sobre esse tema dos dados.
Screen, so I'm going to change. Ready.
Well, hello, it's nice to be with you. I'm Michael Green, CEO of the Social Progress Imperative. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our experience of how you can use data to drive the SDG agenda. I'm going to talk about two things. First of all, a bit about our work with the Social Progress Index, and then also critically the collaboration on the Catalyst 2030 around a new project called the People's Report. So the SDGs, I sort of love them and I sort of hate them. Let me tell you what I mean. I'm going to share some slides and explain what I mean. So the SDGs, I think, are so important because they are a promise to the world. We have a consensus that all the countries of the world have signed on to about creating a sustainable and inclusive future for all in a world without poverty. That's amazing. That's fantastic. I love the ambition. So that's why I love the SDGs. Why I hate the SDGs is because they're so hard to work with. The problem is here, right on screen now. You see 17 of them, yes? I mean, we have the Holy Trinity, we have 7 deadly sins, we have 10 commandments. Only the United Nations would try and inspire the world with a number of goals that's a prime number higher than 10. It's just, I challenge anyone to remember all 17 SDGs. So that's the first problem. It's very confusing. The second problem is that even the goals themselves, they were created by a political process of negotiation. That's fine. But it means that the concepts are all a bit messy and they're not very well defined. And that creates a lot of problems in trying to pull them all together and aggregate them together and say, how are we doing against the SDGs as a whole? And then the third problem is there are 17 SDGs, 169 targets, and literally hundreds of sub-indicators underneath it. And the big problem with this is that most of the data doesn't exist. No country has all the data, and most countries are struggling to get even enough data to measure progress against the SDGs. And also, there's a whole bunch of indicators that are missing because essentially they've been excluded because they're too political, especially around rights and freedoms, etc. So the SDGs, to try and use them as a rallying point for communities for multiple stakeholders to drive progress is actually very difficult because they are so slippery, they're so hard to nail down. So what we've tried to do with the Social Progress Imperative is use our tool, the Social Progress Index, as a more practical way of driving the SDGs. Let me quickly explain. So the Social Progress Index has been around for about 10 years, and it's built around a very clear conceptual model of what makes a good society. And so we've built this very clearly as a conceptual model so you can gather together data and create a single score for a country on how it's doing. And critically, the Social Progress Index maps pretty well against the SDGs. So without having all that complexity of 17 SDGs, we actually can measure progress against the SDGs using the Social Progress Index. And then for the Social Progress Index, what we do is we go out there and we carefully select data points to measure these underlying concepts. So we don't do primary data collection, we use existing data, 53 different outcome indicators. We've got that for 168 countries now. And now a critical thing I want to really emphasize if we're talking about creating data tools is you've got to invest in making sure it's rigorous. We're very lucky that we have very eminent academic advisors on our team, Professor Michael Porter from Harvard Business School, Professor Scott Stern from MIT. And so a lot of effort goes into not just gathering this data, but making sure it's good quality indicators, that they're timely indicators, and also that they're combined using the right statistical tools. Any fool can add up a few numbers and call it an index, but actually carefully selecting the right data and combining it in the right ways is a lot of work. So the quality of your methodology is really important. And we've invested a lot of time in building the Social Progress Index in that way. What that lets us do, therefore, is we actually can then track the progress of the whole world against the SDGs. And what we've seen is that, since 2011, the world has moved forward somewhat. But what we also know is that the world is off track. We think the SDGs are running about 50 or 60 years too late. We're not going to hit the 2030 goals until 2080 or 2090. And we think that's very important when we're thinking about the SDGs to understand what it all means. What we also want to be able to do is to break it down a bit. So what we can also do is show the different areas on which how the world is doing. We can show that actually the world has made most progress towards what we call nutrition and basic medical care, and where the world has made least progress is on inclusiveness. So we know that the world has different areas of strengths and weaknesses, and that can inform our choices and our priorities. And also we can look at the direction of travel. We can say, where is the world improving more or less? And so here we are looking at the world since 2011. And very strikingly, we see giant improvements in access to information and communications through the internet and mobile phones. But we see very worrying decline in scores around personal rights and also issues around inclusiveness and personal safety. So we can break it down and see these different trends in the world to understand the dynamics of how the world is evolving. And that can give insight and action. We obviously can look at how countries are performing. And here I've just put all the countries of the world against GDP per capita just for insight. Norway is the best in the world. Central African Republic is the worst. You'll see Brazil there doing pretty well, better than China on social progress, better than Russia on social progress, and lower level of GDP. That's the good news for Brazil. The bad news for Brazil is that it's one of only 4 countries in the world that's actually gone backwards in social progress in the last 10 years. So Brazil was actually doing much better on its social progress relative to its GDP 10 years ago. So Brazil has done well, but in the last 10 years, it's not been so good. We can break it down further, and we can say how are one of the different areas of Brazil's strength and weakness. And so we can look, for example, at this scorecard. It's all very complicated. But what it's telling us is that where Brazil is weakest is in areas around personal safety and around the education system. Those are the 2 big problem areas for Brazil where it's really not performing as well as it should do. Also a warning light on water and sanitation. And this kind of data, we think, you can take this aggregate score, this total performance for the country, but also you can break it down and see where the different issue areas are, different areas of strength and weakness is really important for actionability. The other thing I think for action is to be able to disaggregate this data further. We're working with partners all over the world to apply the Social Progress Index at the local level. And that actually is a Brazilian innovation. Because, of course, the first subnational social progress index we ever built back in 2014 was actually for the Amazon region of Brazil. 772 municipalities across 9 states. We measured the local social progress of those municipalities. And that's proven a very powerful methodology that we've taken out to Europe. It's now being used by the European Commission, and we're applying now across cities and counties across the United States. So being able to disaggregate to a very local level allows you to understand the local nuance. What we've also done is disaggregated by demographic groups. Earlier this year, we released a youth progress index. So separately, we looked at the progress of young people. And we actually did one for South Africa, for states in South Africa. And the key finding there was that although South Africa has made progress over the last 10 years, not as fast as we'd like, but it has made progress, youth progress had actually gone backwards. So you can see the different distribution of the benefits to different groups in society. So that's been our learning, is you've got to create tools that are methodologically robust, but are very much focused on what your customers want. What our customers in government and business and civil society have said to us is we want something that we can disaggregate to answer lots of different questions. Now, one of the challenges we have with Social Progress Index is that we are relying on existing secondary data, and that doesn't always update so quickly. And so Social Progress Index, in a sense, moves fairly slowly over time and doesn't always track immediate events. So that was why we were excited to collaborate with the Catalyst 2030 community around the People's Report Project. Because the big idea with the People's Report Project was to use the capabilities of our friends at Playverto to build online games to create a kind of instant polling tool to really get a pulse of the world. And then critically using the capabilities of the Catalyst 2030 community to reach out and really drive that into communities around the world. So the People's Report Project, I'll just share a bit of detail on that now. The People's Report Project gives us a very immediate insight onto how people are feeling about the state of their world. We had the extraordinary reach. I think we got to 43 different languages in total, and it ultimately reached more than 17,000 people, some in the most marginalized communities in the world. So we've really got a sense of what people are thinking and feeling about their lives. And that's allowed us to sort of share the state of the world as it is. We can share how people are seeing the climate emergency, how everywhere around the world people are seeing their climate change. Well, we can also see things like, I was really shocked with the results around hunger. We asked, do you go to bed hungry? And in Europe and North America, we even had 10, 15% of people reporting that. So hunger we may associate as being an issue for developing countries, but the fact that people are saying, I go to bed hungry in those societies actually is telling us a lot. And similarly, the People's Report could also respond to questions about what's been the impact of COVID on your lives, not just in terms of the health, but the mental health impacts. And also, I think, giving some of these qualitative aspects. One of my favorite questions, I think most shocking one, was this one about people's fear for the future. We asked people whether they wanted to raise children in their societies. And in so many communities, Middle East, North Africa, 42%, Africa, 37%, people said, I don't have confidence to raise my children in my society. That is a huge vote against how their societies are going, how their societies are being led. So I really want to emphasize there's no perfect way of measuring. What we have to do is combine different approaches to tell us different stories, but always with a view of how is this going to drive action to actually accelerate towards the goal of achieving the SDGs.
Wonderful, Michael. Thank you very much, and such impressive data. I was wondering, you mentioned Brazil, and you showed us very clearly how for different regions we have different depth of problems. How do you think this could be, in terms of public policies, you think that the Social Progress Index could help design better regional public policies? And also, how could that also influence the work of our social entrepreneurs here in Brazil?
Well, I mean, let me give you a case study from my home city of London. We've had a long-standing partnership with one of the parts of London called the London Borough of Barking and Dagenham. And they've really integrated social progress index data for their local communities into how they plan their government services. So they've used the data to say, where are the needs and who has the needs? So that's allowed them to move services around to better target them. So they've actually therefore been delivering services around preventing people getting into debt, helping people get housing, protecting against domestic violence, in lots of innovative different ways that they've actually been able to say, using the Social Progress Index, they know has saved 200 families from homelessness. So by having that data, they've been able to use their services better. What they've also done is they've moved more of their expenditure into prevention, which I think is really, really interesting. And they know because they've moved their expenditure into prevention, they can actually estimate the savings they've made. So they say they've saved more than £3 million in their budget by moving towards prevention using Social Progress Index data. And of course, money saved can then be used for other purposes. And what they've also done is they've used this tool to support public procurement. So what they've done is when they are issuing a contract, they say 10% of the value of a bid, the estimate of how we score the bid, will be based on social performance. And so you as the companies bidding for this contract have to tell us how you're going to improve these social progress outcomes. Your decision how you do it, but you tell us the best way you can do it. There's a wonderful story they told me how they were installing digital billboards in the borough. And they let a contract. And the winning bidder actually proposed that they would install air quality monitors in every single one of these billboards. So up to then, the borough had 2 air monitoring stations. Now they have them all over the borough. So this way of actually creating this tool that's a strategic tool for them, but also an operational tool and a partnerships tool is incredibly powerful. That's just one case study that's very close to me. But this, when you've got this data, it allows you to manage your services to where the greatest needs are and make best use of your resources.
That's wonderful. And collaboration. How do you think the Social Progress Index can really foster collaboration among social entrepreneurs?
So yeah, I think this is what it creates is a common language. Because one of the problems we have in the social sector is that often we have different sectoral groups. We have education groups, we have environmental groups, we have rights groups, and it's very hard to decide how it fits together and where the priorities are. And then when you've got government and business and civil society around the same table, they can have different perspectives. So what it can be is a common language on how to do that. And one of the great case studies of how this has worked is again from Brazil, where several years ago, Natura and Coca-Cola collaborated using the Social Progress Index around community development in the Amazon region of Brazil. And what they found by using the Social Progress Index tool was, number one, the needs of the communities weren't always the same as what they thought they were. So it gave new insight into where the greatest needs of the community were. It therefore opened up collaboration. And it wasn't just Coca-Cola and Natura spending their own money. They were able to use this data to then leverage money from the municipal, state, and federal government, and actually international donors to support that. So I think this creating a language for collaboration is a key part of the role of data.
That's very, very interesting. And do you know of some examples of other examples of the use of business intelligence and big data for social impact?
Yeah, so I think we're very much saying is that this is moving this to scale is a priority. I think people want data at scale. People want consistent data. So actually next year, we're going to be releasing a social progress index for the United States, which is going to be for 500 cities, but within each of those cities, very localized data down to the level of what they call census tracts, communities of about 5,000 people. That means we'll have 23,000 census tracts measured in a comprehensive way. And that scale of data, I think, is useful for policymakers. It's useful analytically for solving social problems, but also it's useful for businesses, because actually investors and businesses want to know about this kind of data as well. If I'm going to decide where to put a supermarket or where to invest, this is actually critical information. What it can also do is help businesses have conversations with government about what they need, the social infrastructure they need. We were in one city in the US, which I probably can't name, talking to the government and the business, looking at social progress index data. And the businesses actually said to the mayor, this is what we need. The reason we can't get good staff to work in our business is because the schools are bad, the roads are bad. If you want to support business, you've got to invest in these social needs. These are actually the things that are holding our business back.
And it certainly helps with all the fake news that we have to face currently, isn't it? Even with the government, we have some fake news. So working with data is really important in that regard.
And it can also be the way that there are some causes are more attractive than others. Again, we work with the city of San Jose, California. This is sitting next to Silicon Valley. It's the richest city in the US, got a lot of social problems. But as the mayor there said to us, one of my challenges is my money is spent on the people who shout loudest, not where there's the greatest need. And so what data can help me to do is make sure the money is spent where it's really needed. So that's another critical role data can play to tackle some of the misinformation or the bias that we have about some issues being given more priority than they deserve.
That's very nice. We are here in Brazil trying to really identify what the private sector, where it wants to invest, which SDGs and what are the priorities. And I think the Social Progress Index can really help if you match the information to create powerful initiatives for collaboration, also to involve the public sector, and also for advocacy. I mean, having such data helps a lot in terms of bringing evidence of the need for investment and for collaboration in certain areas. I think there is a big space for that in Brazil and anywhere in the world, I think.
I mean, that's what the social progress data really shows me and makes me optimistic about, is that we see so many places in the world where the social progress is less than it should be. The other countries with the same GDP, the same resources, are actually doing much better. And that tells us that actually so many of the social problems, the solutions already exist. All we have to do is mobilize our resources in the right way, and we actually could be doing a lot better.
And it was really interesting how you presented the People's Report and the connection with the data, because it's imperative to listen to people, because sometimes the data points out to sanitation, for example, but for that community, at that moment, income generation is more important.
Yes.
Because of the pandemic, the economic recession, whatever. But so combining the listening to the communities with the data is a very powerful tool that we can use as social entrepreneurs and active agents of transformation.
I mean, we're always very clear with the Social Progress Index data. It's there to start a conversation, not to finish a conversation. It's not telling anyone what to do. It's to start a conversation. And that then the next stage is listening to the people. Because exactly as you say, Paula, what people's real needs are, what's the most important to them, you've got to listen to them to hear it. And also to hear what their reality is. Because if we're saying that there's no one hungry in America or Britain, the data shows no, there are people going to bed hungry. There is a hunger problem. And all the data can say people aren't hungry. But if people are hungry and reporting that, that's something we have to address. And that's why I think that bringing together the qualitative data, qualitative and quantitative data is so important to get a complete picture.
And the SDG agenda. I had an event yesterday, and one of the topics was the SDG agenda. And it was really interesting how people are seeing the E, the environment, and the S, the social, together. We cannot protect the environment without having social justice for the people who are living in certain regions, especially here in Brazil with the Amazon region. And it was really interesting how environment and social are coming together, but there is still a big challenge with the governance, which is where everything starts, and it's actually, I sometimes I like to say that it should be GES or GS, because if you don't have the governance in place, initiatives can just stop, can just not move forward or be abandoned, because you need really that the decision makers, they are convinced and they are engaged in solving our social and environmental problems.
Yeah, we just, as part of the 2021 Social Progress Index launch, we did some specific analysis around climate change and social progress. What we found was that, exactly as you say, that inclusive and sustainable development are two sides of the same coin. Countries that do better on social progress and them are making better use of their greenhouse gas emissions. And that actually, again, what we found was that if every country in the world was as good as the best countries for their level of development in how they produce greenhouse gases to get social progress, the world actually could be sustainable. It's our policy choices, it's our choice of economic model that is actually driving sustainability. Progress is not the problem. And I think this is really important point to emphasize, is that people like to say, oh, we can't do anything about climate change because we'll have to stop or reverse progress. Not true. Sustainable and inclusive growth go alongside each other. And then to your other point around the governance, I mean, this is a problem. I think we are seeing, I mean, again, the Social Progress Index data, the way the rights have moved backwards so far in the last 10 years, the majority of countries have gone backwards on rights, tells us a lot about our kind of governance problems. And I think we're going to have to think about what are the mechanisms to really mobilize action on the SDG agenda. And I think we're going to have to look ever more to the private capital markets to take action on this, because it's in their own self-interest. And what I'm really most excited about at the moment is the way that we're seeing investment firms and financial institutions starting to use Social Progress Index data as part of their decision making, because they understand that if they're not sustainable, if they're not inclusive, they're actually destroying their future business.
Michael, is there anything what would be your message to the social Brazilian entrepreneurs or Brazilian social entrepreneurs? What do you think? Because Brazil is such a huge country. You've been here before, we've been together, and we have many different countries in one country. The North is completely different from the South, and we have different populations, different environments, different prosperities also, and a lot of inequality in the country in general. What do you think? What's your message? What should we do in terms of to progress and have more innovative solutions to face the problems we have? Because with the pandemic, the problems aggravated. We have much more issues to deal with now than we had before the pandemic. But I think Brazil is also a country with very creative people, with a lot of good energy, and but we need hope. We need to so what I would like to hear your message. Certainly I ask you to be positive, but I know you're always positive in when addressing social and environmental problems. So
Paolo, it's we know that Brazil it has been having some challenges, not the least of which is COVID. But I think my main message is don't beat yourselves up. I think Brazil has achieved so much. One thing we know about social progress data is very clear, is that it's hard to be a big country. Big countries tend to struggle. That's both in terms of population size and geography. It's also hard in a more diverse society that creates lots of challenges. So in terms of the working environment, Brazil's not an easy place to get things done. And the fact that despite some of the struggles of recent years, Brazil is doing relatively well, I think actually shows the strength in depth within the society of what actually has been achieved. And so I think my message would be the moment is coming for Brazil to achieve liftoff and become a high social progress country. I think the potential is there. Some of the problems are hard and complex. We know issues like, safety and crime, that can be very difficult. But some of the problems Brazil has got in terms of, we saw issues around water and sanitation. We saw some issues around the school system. Some of these are really, really solvable problems. And so actually Brazil can make a huge amount of progress very quickly. So I really believe...
And certainly technology can help in that regard.
Yeah, I think there's a whole wave of technologies coming that actually can drive these solutions very quickly. So we have an opportunity to make very rapid progress in some of these areas. So I think, Brazil can have a golden decade of progress ahead of it.
I hope you're right, Michael. And I also believe in that. I believe that Brazil has a huge potential to show the world how to overcome problems and become a rich nation, not in terms of GDP, but in terms of the social progress index.
Yes.
Which is much more important, well-being to everyone and to be an inclusive country. I hope you're right, and we are all working for that. Thank you very much, Michael, and it was really a pleasure to have you with us, and I hope we can meet in the future personally, and thank you very much for being here with us.
It has been a great pleasure to be with you, and I look forward to coming back to Brazil again and having a wonderful time, as I always do. Thank you so much.
Trazendo esse uso dos dados e essa perspectiva de como usar a tecnologia, usar os dados a nosso favor. Acho que é importante dizer, né? A gente no IDES, que é o Instituto para o Desenvolvimento do Investimento Social, sempre acreditamos nesse uso de dados. A gente faz a pesquisa Doação Brasil. Aliás, hoje é o dia de doar, gente. Façam sua doação e contribuam para esse movimento global, que é o dia de doar, em contraposição a Black Friday, é o Giving Tuesday. Mas essa ideia de usar os dados é muito importante para avançar e ter mais qualidade no investimento para resolver problemas socioambientais. A avaliação de impacto é algo muito importante para o nosso setor, inclusive, né, a gente teve casos lá no IDES de fazer avaliação e isso ser utilizado para aprovar uma política pública. Isso aconteceu com a primeira infância, que foi até um dos painéis anteriores aqui ao nosso. Teve caso também de usar os dados para ampliar um programa de impacto social, porque você tem confiança e também permite fazer ajustes, né, em algumas questões do programa que os dados ajudam nessa análise. E também eu acho que o nosso caso, que é o do Catalyst, é ajudar no processo de colaboração, porque a partir dos dados, da evidência, a gente consegue ter mais certeza daquilo que é a prioridade, né? O que é o mais importante, e alinhar os interesses entre as partes para poder permitir uma colaboração mais efetiva. Acho que essas são questões muito importantes. Como o Michael trouxe, né? Os dados, eles permitem ter uma linguagem comum, uma linguagem que todos podem entender. Inclusive, eu acredito muito no processo, né, do uso de dados para aproximar os três setores, o governo, o setor privado e o terceiro setor, em agendas socioambientais positivas e de impacto, né, para a sociedade. Acho que eu queria só, antes de passar a palavra para a Gi, para fazer a finalização, queria só reforçar o nosso convite para quem estiver interessado em participar do Catalyst Brasil, que é esse movimento, né? A gente está dentro da agenda global, né? Esse movimento de colaboração para o atingimento dos ODS, mas a gente tem o capítulo brasileiro, e se você se interessar, é só se inscrever no site do Catalyst. A Carol, né, que é a nossa coordenadora do movimento aqui, já colocou no chat, é só clicar ali, fazer sua inscrição, e a gente vai avaliar aí o seu pedido de entrada. A ideia é que a gente consiga cada vez mais empreendedores sociais e agentes de transformação que queiram colaborar para o atingimento dos objetivos do desenvolvimento sustentável. Mas só para finalizar, né, eu acho que como o Michael trouxe, o momento é agora. O Brasil tem tudo, tem uma potência para criar transformações sociais e também trazer, né, se tornar numa sociedade mais equânime, mais justa para todos e para todas. Acredito muito na força da nossa sociedade, na força dos nossos empreendedores, na força do nosso povo brasileiro, para fazer desse momento um momento de transformação e a gente realmente conseguir transformar o país naquele país que a gente sonha. Mas claramente a gente não consegue fazer isso sem o apoio de todos os setores e de cada um de nós, né, fazendo a sua parte. E aí eu queria passar para a Gi fazer suas considerações finais.
É isso mesmo, Paula. Adorei ter ouvido o Michael, já encontrei com ele outras vezes, né? Super apropriado tudo que ele falou. E eu queria compartilhar com todo mundo duas experiências que eu tenho com dados, né? Eu sou aí cofundadora do CREM, do Centro de Recuperação e Educação Nutricional. Fiquei algumas décadas lá e é uma entidade que trabalhou sempre em parceria com o setor privado e a universidade, né? É uma entidade que trabalha para a recuperação de crianças desnutridas e a gente começou com subnutrição. E olha só, para dizer para vocês da importância da gente avaliar e utilizar os dados. Quando a gente começou com subnutrição, toda a literatura científica da época dizia que a única possibilidade para recuperar uma criança subnutrida era recuperar a proporção peso para altura, que ela não poderia crescer. E a gente foi trabalhando e foi estudando, e foi analisando como as nossas crianças evoluíam, como elas se desenvolviam, trabalhando com a família, buscando uma recuperação sustentável, ou seja, engajando também a família e não separando a criança da família. Depois de alguns anos de trabalho com pesquisa científica, nós falamos, não, a recuperação nutricional precisa ser recuperação em estatura. A criança precisa voltar a crescer aquela estatura, voltar a alcançar a estatura para qual ela está, para qual o DNA dela está preparado. Né? E se ela não faz isso, a consequência disso é um adulto com uma doença crônica ou degenerativa, ou seja, obesidade, diabetes, hipertensão, cardiopatia. Isso fez uma mudança radical na forma como se trata a desnutrição, se tratava aqui no Brasil e se trata no mundo. Né? É um dos artigos, um dos trabalhos fundantes para mudar isso. Então, para dizer que é muito importante que nós que estamos trabalhando com intervenção social tenhamos essa preocupação de avaliar o que estamos fazendo. Né, de verdade. O segundo ponto que eu queria sublinhar sobre também a importância dos dados, que o Michael já destacou, mas eu queria falar da minha experiência pessoal, é que agora eu estou como coordenadora de inclusão produtiva no Sebrae, né? Inclusão produtiva quer incluir as pessoas a terem acesso a gerar renda a partir do próprio trabalho. De uma forma digna e estável, de modo que elas possam superar os seus problemas, a situação de exclusão crônica, de pobreza, o ciclo vicioso da pobreza no qual elas se encontram. E é importantíssimo fazer isso de uma forma adequada e focar, porque o crescimento econômico, o desenvolvimento econômico de um país, se ele não é inclusivo, ele não é sustentável. Ou seja, países desiguais crescem menos. Quanto maior a desigualdade num país, menor o crescimento. Isso são estudos do Fundo Monetário Internacional. E quanto maior a desigualdade no país, aquele crescimento rápido que eventualmente um país possa ter, o Fundo Monetário chama até o feitiço do rápido crescimento, ele não é sustentável, ele não permanece no tempo, ele acaba rapidamente, né? Para dizer o quanto é sério, né? O quanto é sério a gente poder avaliar o que a gente está fazendo e a gente poder focar, fazer a intervenção focando no público-alvo que a gente quer chegar e da maneira adequada para responder às necessidades daquele público. E aí eu fecho compartilhando com vocês um sonho, né? Que é da gente poder fazer um People's Report, ou seja, um relatório do povo, como aquele que o Michael descreveu, aqui no Brasil, amplamente difundido entre nós. Né? Já temos um grupo bastante consistente de empreendedores sociais no Kettle, somos quase 100 membros agora, e iniciamos há poucos meses, um ano atrás, mas seria maravilhoso poder contar com a adesão de mais pessoas e podermos rodar, né? É uma pesquisa muito simples de responder, ela não necessita que a pessoa seja alfabetizada, porque ela tem muitas figuras, é muito fácil, e esse seria o sonho, né, Paula? Que a gente pudesse, além de aumentar as pessoas que queiram colaborar e, portanto, se juntar ao movimento do Catalyst, que a gente pudesse fazer uma ação integrada assim, de modo a gente conhecer as reais necessidades das pessoas do nosso país e até influenciar em políticas públicas dessa forma. Então, eu queria agradecer muito, né, a presença de todos e dizer que estamos disponíveis, né? Vocês já têm aí o link de como se engajar no Catalyst e dessa forma podem entrar em contato conosco. E agradecer também ao Green Nation por nos oferecer essa oportunidade e termos essa ocasião maravilhosa para discutirmos um tema que nem sempre é abordado quando se fala de intervenção social. Muito obrigada a todos e boa tarde.
E é isso aí, gente. Entra lá no catalyst2030.net, né? Faz o seu cadastro, já tem o formulário em português, né? Já está traduzido. Então, se você trabalha com transformação socioambiental, junte-se a nós nesse movimento de colaboração para o atingimento dos objetivos do desenvolvimento sustentável. Senão, como a Gi falou, né? Nós só vamos chegar lá em 2092. Né? E não em 2030. Então, acho que esse é o nosso desafio e acho que o Brasil tem essa potência, né? Que são os seus empreendedores sociais. Imagina se juntos a gente tiver numa agenda colaborativa. Essa é a ideia, essa é a mensagem. Queria mais uma vez também agradecer o Green Nation por dar esse espaço para a gente estar aqui e trazer tanto a mensagem do Catalyst como as palavras e aí a análise do Michael Green, né? Que é uma pessoa, um pensador importante do nosso setor e que está também agitando tanto o Catalyst como né, o Social Progress Index, que é uma ideia maravilhosa. Imagine se os países começassem a se movimentar a partir desses dados e não só olhando né, para o produto interno bruto, para o PIB, para a geração de riqueza do país. Acho que uma riqueza muito maior é o bem-estar das pessoas e essa possibilidade da gente ter um tratamento com equidade e com justiça para todos e todas. E é isso, gente. Muito obrigada a todos por estarem aqui e nos vemos no próximo evento do Catalyst. Quem sabe vocês todos estarão lá com a gente, todos e todas.
Obrigada, boa tarde.